back. You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington. And you can already see who's joining me because I don't know if you guys knew, we're now available on YouTube on video. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can already see that I am joined by Mr. Mike Giletto Sr.
How's it going, everybody?
And Mr. Kevin Durso.
What's up, everybody?
And we're going to get into today's show, and we're going to pull back the curtain a little bit. It's going to be a good one. Fireworks were going off in the group chat all week, and the bracket has been contentious. Let's just say that. And this bracket over at YWT Podcast on Twitter, we're discussing the most memorable Flyers game of all time. Sorry, I always have to correct myself when I say that because the verbiage is very important.
I think they mean the same exact thing. Most memorable, greatest. How could the greatest game not be the most memorable? But your point is understood and well taken. And the fireworks in my head are still going off. But go ahead.
And we're trying to keep a lid on them for just a second. So I can tell you, again, we're on Twitter at YWT Podcast. Kevin is at Kevin_Durso. Mike Sr. is at Mike from S Jersey. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, Podbean, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Like I said, we're available on video. So if you're watching this, hello. Yes, that is my cat litter box in the background. So we're just going to get into it.
Can I throw one disclaimer in before we start?
Okay.
Oh, boy.
Oh, boy.
My opinions and disappreciation, making up a word there. My displeasure, there we go, are in no particular order. They're in random. Doesn't necessarily the first one is my least favorite or vice versa. They're in no particular. You're
just mad about everything.
Exactly.
Okay. You're mad about everything. We understand.
Exactly.
Okay, but either way, this bracket, I think the most important thing is this bracket's been fantastic. It's been a lot of fun. It's generated a lot of conversation. We've talked about a lot of really good hockey games. At the end of the day, everything that made this bracket was a really good hockey game. We come down to the Final Four. Final Four, we got 2 cup games, the biggest comeback in Flyers history, and the most socially significant game in Flyers history. Is that fair to say? Would you say that the Final Four we have is representative of a big part of Flyers history?
Well, absolutely.
The Final Four, I can split a few hairs here and there. At the end of the day, for all of my hand wringing and going crazy about it, I can't say the Final Four is wrong. I think the fan base ultimately, those 4 that are there, got it for the most part right.
But
and I think what you said about the Red Army game, I think you put it very well. Very socially significant game, and one of the most significant games in Flyers history. Even though it didn't lead to a cup and it wasn't a playoff game, it was just a hugely important game to the NHL. And one of the few moments, I think Kevin had said this before too, that the entire NHL was on the Flyers side.
Mm-hmm. A lot of the world was too.
Yeah, bottom.
Yeah, a lot of the world too.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, here's what I'll say about the Final Four. I mean, I did the way I did it anyway. You guys, we put out the bracket, and I looked at the way that everything was structured. And I basically, from day one, before we even had a result, filled my own out as if it was the NCAA tournament, and just did, okay, I'm going start to finish, round 1 to the end. I'm picking a champ for my own picks.
And by the way, for future brackets, you can do the same. Fill it out on Twitter. Mike always puts up a blank bracket. Fill it out and send them in. We'll talk about them on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go for it.
So I will tell you right off the bat, and I'm trying not to disclose some of my own personal picks too early in the show.
We'll get there.
I was 4 for 4 with the Final Four. That's how my Final Four played out as well.
And I think a lot of people looking at this bracket kind of
I don't want to sit there and say that I didn't sit there and think it was tough to get there.
Let's talk about the Elite 8, right? How many of the Elite 8 did you have?
Well, here's where I'll go with this. There were 16 first-round games, if you will, like this against this.
Matchups, yeah.
The one I picked won 14 of 16 times.
Okay.
And then we got to the 8 second-round matchups to get to the final 8 games, and my pick was the winner 7 times out of 8.
Okay, so you had seven of the Elite 8.
Now that being said, there were 7 first-round matchups that I have some form of a comment on based on how it shaped out. And then in the second round, there's only 8 second-round matchups. I have something to say on 7 of the 8. because that was where I found in my personal opinion, as I filled it out, I went, okay, first round, I'm going through, and some of them are easy. I had to look at 3 of them and really debate, as Mike Sr. said previously with the player one, the eggs on the roof, and I have to figure out which way it's going to go.
Okay.
I had 3 that I did that with significantly, and the others I kind of looked at and I went, no, there's an obvious winner.
Right.
I picked it. The second round, I thought 8 out of 8 times, I didn't even have to think. I knew exactly where I was going 8 times. And then I got to the final 8, like the final 8 games going against each other, and I went, well, now there's only one that I saw that I really knew right off the bat, I'm picking this, and the other 3 were heavy debate.
And for this entire, and I totally agree, Kevin, and for this entire discussion, Kyle especially, you're going to have to agree with us to some extent.
Oh, I'm going to have to, huh?
You can hear, or this whole discussion today really isn't going to mean a whole lot. There's a difference between a team, a game, if you will, a matchup going 90-10 and 51-49. There's a difference. Mm-hmm. You've alluded in the past that there really is no difference. A win is a win. If you don't suspend that premise, this whole conversation is going to pale a little bit. So can you concede that point?
I think within a certain range, either a matchup is close or it's not. And there's no difference in my mind between a 70-30 matchup and a 95-5 matchup.
To some extent, I'll agree with that.
That being said,
it's a clear 70% is a clear consensus.
If
not
it's
much
60-40 or closer, it's a close matchup and it can go either way, in my opinion.
Right. And see, I think to Mike Sr.'s point, there are certain ones, and most of my comments on a lot of these things are, this was too close. This was too much of a blowout. Like it's that when we look at the results. And there was a lot of, as I saw through the Twitter poll, as I saw matchups being played out, there were comments that are going, who are these people to say this one's not the one? Like, this needs to be the one. And who are these, maybe there was one where it was, who are these 12% of the people that actually think that this should have won? Now, and I'm not, again, I said on the last show, but when we were wrapping up players and we were going into games, it was that this was going to be much more subjective based off of, hey, maybe I was there, maybe I remember what I was doing when I watched this, so I knew there was going to be some. And I will admit that when I made my own picks, I made one personal pick the entire bracket.
All right, what was it? Come on.
I have good reason. Any other time, I would have told you that the better game in the first round was Game 6 against Toronto, Ronek's OT goal. It's the better game. I picked the Stadium Series because it's the best game I've ever covered. Flat out. That's my only personal pick. Okay. And that was the only reason I did it. And granted, there are picks that I'm like, when you look at a bracket in college basketball, you might, maybe you have one that you go, I'm going to flip a coin on this one. And because it's closer than the other one, you go, whoever it goes on to play is going to win, no matter what. So I'll bump this one or this one over, and it's not going to matter in the long term, like in the long run of the tournament. But it was just I'll pick that one because I like the team name or I like their colors or I don't know. Like you do that stuff in college basketball. That was my only personal pick, but otherwise, there's every other reason out there, Ronek's OT goal wins. Sure. And it should win. And trust me, I was glad that one was at least a close one. I understand why people picked the Stadium Series. I thought and here's the thing. I was one that I really wanted to be a 70-30 the other way and go, I picked it because it was a personal pick, but everybody else picked the Ronek game. Like I would have loved for that to happen. That was the only one I did personally. The rest of them I picked strictly off of, this is the one I truly think is the better game, based on historical reasons or, whatever. So, if we want to go rolling right through the first round.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. I'll start at the very top then. I just go in order of the way we did it, the different matchups or whatever. So the first one was the 74 Cup game against Boston, against the home opener from 2019.
Which got several votes?
Yeah, come on. How did 18% of the vote go to a game from this year, period? First of all, that wasn't even the best game from this year, in my opinion.
Right.
I don't even think it comes close. I know it was look, I get it. Carter Hart's first shutout, great save. Yeah, it's memorable to an extent among
you beat the Devils
this year. But you beat the Devils, and it was the second game of the season. I just don't find that to be memorable, and it definitely doesn't compete with a cup clincher. It,
Right.
it
And
didn't even come close.
And on the surface, you say 18%, really not a big deal. But for such a difference as those games are, if you can forgive 1%, you can't you say it's okay for 18 times 1%. That's that's way too many people who think that game mattered more than the 1974 Stanley Cup clincher. It's and we'll continue with that game as we proceed.
Yeah, I mean that should have been as close to unanimous as possible. I mean,
right? If you were ever going to get 100-0, that was the game.
Right. I mean that's Bobby Clark against Andre Dupont. It should have been.
Right.
It is.
Right.
It just is. I mean, I already touched on the Stadium Series against the Roanoke game. I'll let Mike Senior have some time on that one if he would like as well, because I kind of threw my thoughts in there.
The Stadium Series game, and I get that it was a good game, but to me, I just don't have it as a memorable game. It was a good hockey game, and you won't even say a great hockey game, but as far as memorable, I honestly don't even really remember the game. To compare it to the JR game, the overtime, I just don't get it, but I'm not going to freak out that badly about that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
of all the others, I'll say, okay, I can live with that one, even though I think it was definitely wrong. It should have been the Roanoke game.
Yeah, and look, like I said, for me, it was a personal pick because I was not only was I there, but I was covering it and to know where I was and to be able to see. I mean, most of it, though, Mike Senior's right. Most of it was forgettable for most of it. I mean, it was kind of ugly hockey because of the weather conditions.
The ice was terrible.
And realistically, if you don't get to the point where it was briefly, I think for a handful of seconds, a 5-on-3 for the Flyers late, they score a power play goal.
6
now
seconds.
it's 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Now it's 3 minutes left, and it's a 1-goal game. They get the really fortunate goal from Voracek that ties it up. And granted, don't get me wrong, the thing that makes that part of it memorable for me is that there's 70,000 people going nuts right in front of me. I mean,
right.
Stadium was insane.
Well, and look, from my vantage point of being in the press box, I now know what zoo animals feel like because people turned around, were banging on the glass at us. I'm like, okay, and granted, like you have to channel that from where I am. I have to channel everything and go, okay, I'm just here, don't do anything. There's no reaction. And I mean, I was probably as surprised as anybody when that shot went in, and it happened as that part of it. I was down that end of the rink, if you will, which isn't saying a whole lot for an outdoor game.
No.
But I could clearly see the change in direction from the side to the net. It goes in. I'm like, okay, that was a shocker. I'm like, oh, wow. And I had a decent enough view of Giroux's leaking through at the other end to get in for the overtime one. And it was just cool that they won that game. It was the first outdoor game they ever won too, which is something that puts it a little bit up there, but I'm not going to haggle over it. And I don't really, go ahead, Kyle.
The other thing about that game, and this is going to be a recurring theme for this bracket. What percentage of Twitter users are 25 or under, would you say? A decent percentage?
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
I'm going to give you a game there just to jump around here. That's going to
no. Can we stick for like 1 second here?
Go ahead.
25 or younger, decent percentage. Maybe not a majority, but there's a decent percentage of the population 25 or younger on Twitter at YWT Podcast. By the way, those people were 10 or less when this game happened, and we can argue about the other games. We can talk about the cup clinchers. We can talk about the Red Army game. We can talk about Game 7 against Boston. 2004 Game 6 against Toronto. It's not in the top 5 best games in franchise history.
No,
it's not. In my opinion, and something I think that is going to be a theme throughout this show, given our conversations offline, is knowing the history. And I think this one is a forgivable one to slip through the cracks. The fact that this lost is not a surprise to me.
It's not a gigantic miss. It's not. But
okay, just for the record,
the Twitter youngster argument, I'm tired of it. Because
why?
The Red Army game won 70-30 over the 2010 final Game 3, and it should have. Okay, and I'll give kudos to the fan base. They got that one seriously right. 70-30. The same Twitter fans, 25 and younger, gave a 70-30 Red Army win to a 2010 game. So I don't want to hear that they got a 2019 versus the Jeremy Roenick game wrong. It was because they're young. That's a BS argument.
Is the Red Army game a top 5 game in franchise history?
Absolutely.
Yes, it is. It's top 4.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that is a cornerstone of history. Everyone knows the cornerstones of history. Everyone knows George Washington was the first president.
Right, but if it was an under 25 audience, then a 2010 Cup game that they win in overtime could have run the gamut here.
It could have.
Right.
That's your argument.
I absolutely agree.
Instead, people realized, okay, it's one game that they win, probably the most exciting one in a series that they lost. Okay, now they know to put the game that they win against a world-class, Olympic-winning organization, if you will, of the Russians. You know to put it for the social significance, maybe even if you don't even care about the social significance of the game, but you know that it was a big deal they won from a hockey significance.
Okay, let's talk about this Red Army game real quick. Let's play a little what if. We're talking about the Final Four. The Red Army game is one of our Final Four. One of our other Final Four is Game 7 against Boston, 2010. I would like us to match up if those two were to meet in the finals. I don't want to lean on the scales. We can play with different combinations of this. But I want to remove the cup games, and I want to talk about what if it's the two non-cup games in the finals. I'm curious to hear what you gentlemen think would happen on a Twitter poll or should happen, as in what the correct answer is.
You have this way of asking these questions, and I'm not even anticipating them, and I'm like, wow, that's a great question.
Yeah, it is.
Let's go for it. Let's take out the cup games because listen. We're not going to lean on the scale too much because I think we learned our lesson with greatest players.
And in this one, I don't think we can lean on the scale because I think
I agree.
So
everyone just has their opinion.
There's no obvious. I mean, I'm going to give you my opinion.
But it's easy to sit here and say cup games next level, and that's a completely fair argument, and I can't touch it. I'm avoiding this argument because I don't know an argument against it. But let's take the other two games. What if? And if the cup games win, then this is our third place game. Red Army game, 2010 Game 7 against Boston. You open Twitter, and Mike Jr. just put the poll up at Mike_Giletto at YWT podcast. He just put the poll up, and you're looking at it, and you're sitting there, and you're staring, and you see those two little blue bubbles, and one says Red Army, and the other says Game 7 against Boston. Mike Sr., which one are you picking?
Well, after I go, wow.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Final Four, baby. Let's go.
I do go Red Army, and here's the reason why.
Because you're
and again,
because you have grandkids.
I'm not gonna say the 2000, the Boston Game 7. I'm not gonna say it's insignificant and couldn't win. It absolutely could, and I could vote for it and sleep at night. But the Red Army game, the Boston Bruins
sleep at night or sleep at 6:30 p.m. after after you're done eating dinner.
The Boston Bruins, who had, were a formidable team, the Esposito, Bobby Orr, Boston Bruins, got smoked by the Russians, the Red Army team. The Rangers, who the Flyers beat in Game 7 the year before to win the Cup, in the semifinals, super terrific team, smoked by the Red Army team. The Montreal Canadiens, who would soon go on to win 4 consecutive Stanley Cups, got fortunate to tie them 3-3. Okay, that's the team that beat the Flyers in the finals later that year. The Flyers smoked the Red Army team. It wasn't even close, okay? And the afternoon TV game that it was on, I remember watching it, them storming off the ice. I mean, it just had much more significant. I mean, yeah, everybody's, again, then the reason why it's close, that Boston game, it was a tremendous game, and I'll always remember the feed going down, and we couldn't watch it for a long period of time. It was memorable. We had to listen to it on the radio for portions, so it was memorable for a lot of different reasons, and it'll always hold a special place in my heart, that game. And if it had won a cup, then it has, to me, an even more legitimate win over the Red Army. But the fact that it didn't lead to a cup win, or it wasn't a Stanley Cup clinching win, yeah, if you come back from 4-0 to win the cup in that series, then I think it beats the Red Army. But it didn't. It got them to the cup. They didn't win the cup.
It was actually only in the second round, to clarify.
Well,
it was only a second round game.
Look, it got them to a cup final.
Okay.
It led to a cup final.
Okay.
They smoked the Canadiens, I believe, in the next round, like 4-1. So that's why, to me, the Red Army game still wins. Just the significance of what it meant. And it meant so much to everybody that it actually, you can argue, and there's a lot of Flyers players who have said this, who are on that team, it actually started to fracture the team. It was such a huge win that they became not only rock stars in Philadelphia, they became rock stars in every city they went to and the click started, and a lot of players
Imagine the cocaine.
a lot of the players
Oh,
believe
man.
losing
beer.
Perrant was a much bigger factor, but a lot of players believe even if they lost Perrant, but that Red Army game doesn't happen, and if the locker room doesn't get fractured to some extent because of the rock star status they achieved, they still think they could have beaten the Canadians. That's how significant that game was. They went to every city in America and Canada and were just gods.
Kevin, as somebody who was born on the other side of 1985, how do you feel about this matchup?
Okay.
Because that is the question. In my opinion, I think age is a huge factor here, and this is it for me, right?
Well,
I got the guy who was there in the 70s versus the more modern fan.
And in this one specifically, because I think there's going to be a lot of people who remember the 2010 game in that age group and the Red Army game in another. I didn't think we would get to this point this early in the show. So I wasn't prepared to disclose all this early in the show.
Lay it out there, baby. Let's go.
Okay. You pose it as a hypothetical. For me, this was my final.
Okay.
This was my final.
Wow, okay.
I'm sorry. I can't handle the heat
And
behind these takes.
That being said, Kevin, before you go into all of it, after everything I just said, here's how great a question it was. I'm sure I'm not going to disagree with one word you're about to say. Go
Okay,
ahead.
here we go. So
and you know what? That, more than anything, says we have a really good Final Four.
Yeah, it does.
Correct.
I had said that from the very beginning. I said it to me. There are 6 games. There is a clear-cut top 6, and you want to know why I think it's a clear-cut top 6? Because to me, these 6 games, you don't have to give the date, or it's just this against blank.
Right.
There's a specific way you can say it, and everybody knows exactly what game you're talking about. If I say 74 Cup, you know which game
First
I'm
Cup.
talking about.
Right.
You know, if I say 75 Cup, you know which one I'm talking about. Then go to the other 4 that I have on this list. I could say Red Army game, or I could say beating the Russians. Doesn't matter how I phrase
real quick, what's the date that game happened? Anybody know it?
It was
February,
then.
I think, of 76.
Okay, but that's the point. Continue.
I could say Keith Primo or 5 overtimes. You know what game I'm talking about.
Right.
I could say Game 7 or the comeback. You know what game I'm talking about.
Right.
And I could say JJ Daigneault or the night the Spectrum shook, and you know what game I'm talking about.
Right.
That's the top 6 to me. And
Agreed.
I could have made an argument that I could take the 2 cup clinchers out of that and make the Final Four out of the other 4 because of the way that you can phrase. I mean, it's close. It's dangerously close. And I say that
tough to take 74 out of this.
It is tough to take 74.
Yeah,
75 was the one that was
you have an
easiest.
argument.
Well, and I have a reason for that, believe it or not. I think the reason is because when I think you see clips of 74 way more often than you see 75. Not that there's any rhyme or reason to it. I just think 75 is not nearly as exposed as 74 is.
Kevin, I think
because it's not as important. I think that's kind of the.
I don't. I mean, obviously, it's not the first cup. So by definition, no, it's not as important. But again, having lived through it, I know Kyle's going to love that. They were clearly better.
Sure.
Buffalo.
Oh yeah.
They were underdogged to Boston. They were
less competitive.
Boston had home
less
ice.
Fun.
Not only Boston had home ice, the Flyers had never won a game in Boston in their history. How are they going to win that series? They are seriously underdog. 4 games are going to be played in Boston, 4 of 7, and they've never won there.
And not to mention Buffalo had come into the league at the same time the Flyers. So when it was a original 6 against expansion, and it was
we're the returning champ.
No way that this little expansion team is going to find a way to beat the big bad Bruins. That's what.
On the other side of that, you can actually say
the first expansion team to win the cup.
Right, Buffalo did well to get it to 6.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Is the flip side of that. So that's the reason why the 75, to me, I could see losing to a Red Army game.
It's much more special when you're the underdog.
Correct.
It certainly is.
And
you're first. Exactly. I mean, don't get me wrong. It was a tough call. And like I said, these were for the last 4 that I just gave outside of the cup clinchers. These went against each other.
Not to jump sports, but imagine the Eagles win 3 more Super Bowls over the next 15 years. Is any one of those going to be as special as what Nicky Six did? No, never.
But significant, and again, first and significant underdog.
Yeah.
And in the same note, in kind of a similar situation here, beating a juggernaut like the Patriots is a little more special than, say, the Phillies beating the 08 Rays.
Which the Flyers.
Yeah, it's a title, but come on.
Which the Flyers did to Boston. They were the juggernaut.
Yeah,
75 is also the last cup, though. if you think about it.
Correct.
It's
There's something to be said for the most recent cup, and that's sad.
Well,
there is.
Well, there is, but see, at the same time, that's another reason why I think 75 is viewed differently than 74. Your first is your first. Your last, being that far in the past,
you're just trying to replace it.
Has become a jabbing point for other people. It's a way people troll each other.
All you're trying to do is update that number.
So now, how many people really want to hear about 75? A lot of people don't want to hear about 75. They do care about 74 being the first one, though.
Okay, Kevin, you haven't answered the question, though. Red Army or Boston?
No, I know I haven't answered the question.
We cut him off to the point.
Red Army or Boston? Time out. You're talking about your 6 games and your Red Army or Boston.
We needed all that info for him to
And by the way, not to throw out another plug, but the last 2 series I'm doing for Series in Review on Sports Talk Philly are 75 and 74. And in saying that I'm doing that, I kind of I've gotten myself into the historical. Do your research. Look at how great this is. I put down when I did the 87 Cup final, I think it's the greatest Stanley Cup final to ever happen based off of everything that you see and the way that was so competitive. And believe me, when we get to talking about those games as we go through how we got here, I have a great point about that series that I don't even know if a lot of people maybe not people like us who dive in and know a lot of stuff and dive in and know the history like crazy, but maybe people don't realize something that really hindered the Flyers in that series.
Huge. Go ahead.
But if I had to pick between these 2 games, how to answer the question, and it's hard because I remember that Game 7 so vividly. And again, of course, because I did live through that. I remember what I was doing and, everything about it. I still pick Red Army.
Wow, okay.
Red Army holds the bigger significance in the franchise's history and is more memorable because of the fact that it is, to my knowledge anyway, it is one of the only times, and I think that we said it's one of the only times that the whole league's rooting for the Flyers in that sense. And I think about in the Broad Street Bullies documentary, they close it with that game. They don't close it when they finish the back-to-back cups. They actually go through to 76 to the end of it. Actually, it's a disappointing ending to that doc, too, because it goes through the 76 final.
Oh, the Flyers are a disappointing ending. Name a more iconic.
No, I hear you, But when they talk about that game, they said, or as they talk about the events leading up to the Red Army game and the back-to-back cups, they didn't want to even give them the cup. There was just this scowling feeling that they just handed the cup to a team that was known as the Broad Street Bullies.
Right.
The league did not like the fact that they were that good and that they won back-to-back cups. But then it all changed when it was every one of our teams hasn't been able to beat this team yet. Please go out there and do what you do and beat this team. This Red Army team. And
they beat them in every sense of the word.
It really is funny for me, and we can talk about this as a whole show topic one day.
Mm-hmm.
There's an era of Flyers history where the league looked at us like we were a team full of Tom Wilsons and Brad Marchands, and we just kind of laugh at it.
The game was so massive.
No, I understand, but they looked at us the way that modern NHL fans look at Tom Wilson and Brad Marchand. And it's just wild to me that the city of Philadelphia has completely embraced it.
It was with even more disdain than for anything in the game right now. And it's much more disdain. And the city absolutely, the Jason Kelce, nobody likes us, we don't care. Underdog. They just loved the fact that it was Philadelphia against the whole league. The fan base embraced it. The team embraced it. Snyder embraced it. So when Snyder embraces it, he loved it. He loved it.
Well, we've talked about the clip several times. The clip where he sits there and he's describing the day's events of that Red Army game and goes, well, they left the ice. They don't come back. We're not paying them.
Right.
So the snark that he has in his voice when he says that, even in just remembering the moment, says it all, because it was just the way they did things. You don't like it? Oh, well, this is how we play. Come back or we're not paying you.
And you really can't overstate the Soviet Union, America versus the Soviet Union war that was going, the Cold War that was going on. Ed Snyder had said on many occasions, he loved Bobby Clark for a lot of different reasons, but the 1972 chop over, I can't remember the Russian's name. Was it Larionov or Kuznetsov, whatever the frig his name was. He loved that Bobby Clark wanted to win that bad. And it wasn't a slash. It wasn't a little chop. He two-handed him from above his head.
It was assault.
Down to his ankle. Oh, he could have been arrested easily.
It was assault.
Easily. And he broke his ankle. Because if I can't catch him, I got to break his ankle because it's the only way I can win. When you're willing to do that to win the game, Ed Snyder just absolutely adored Bobby Clark the rest of his life.
Sorry. Are you referring to greatest flyer of all time? Bobby
Absolutely.
Clark? As
Absolutely.
evidenced by our Twitter poll over at YWT Podcast?
Absolutely. No one, I mean, that's a Jordan-like will to win. You won't see a bigger will to win than that.
I think that's fair to say. Kevin picks the Red Army. Okay.
I'm surprised. I'm
not
mildly
again,
surprised.
I think you guys are both correct in that this one is so close that there's no wrong answer.
No, there is no wrong.
And look, as I filled it out, I tried to make sure I pointed out as I filled mine out, going, where did I see star this matchup? Where was it tough? That one took me a long time to look at the two games and go, I remember every detail of that game 7. Like
every detail of that game. I could play it in my head.
But the Red Army game especially the Red Army game too. See, when the other thing that I tried to consider also is the Red Army game was a singular exhibition game where there is no do-over here.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
Now, granted, a game 7 is similar. It's winner take all. You only have one shot to win.
There's also no do-over.
Yeah. And there's no do-over. But a series can dictate how you got there. So, I mean, I don't know, like, would it have been disappointing if the Flyers had lost that game 7? Of course it would have. But they also had the odds so stacked against them leading up to it. It's not like it was a game 7 where they led the series 3-1 or trailed 3-2 and won the last 2. It's that they won the last 4. You know, and I'm not trying to say that should sway it any. From a standpoint of here is one singular game. You're not going to play this team in this state ever again. Like, things are going to change. You're not going to have the back-to-back Cup champion Broad Street Bullies ever again to play that game, and you're not going to have the way the Soviets were either. It's one meeting, one shot at it, and you can either dominate this game by playing your style, or you're going to follow suit with the rest of the league potentially and just get blown out by it. And they allow 15 shots in the game, I think it was, or something like that. They barely gave them anything, and that was the greatest team in the world at that time.
And I went Red Army game, so I agree with everything you just said. But what brings it even just a little closer is if the Flyers had won that game 3-2.
Oh, don't do this to me. Don't do this to me. Don't do this to me.
If the Flyers had won
No, don't do this to me. I'm going to talk about this. Don't do this. Don't do what you're about to do. Don't do what you're about to do.
What draws it even closer, though, back to it's really splitting hairs, is they also were down in the game 3-0.
So you're just going to do this to me, huh? So
another thing that I think also would have pulled it a little closer to is, unfortunately, and maybe this is just me, I'm not trying to speak for the rest of the fan base who all obviously lived through that portion as well. They go on to win the Cup that year. It totally changes the whole thing. Absolutely. They didn't win the Cup. I know they got to the Cup final, but if that sets the tone for the rest of the run, hey, you came back from 3-0 and you won the Cup, I think it makes it even more significant.
If they win that Cup, I'm probably voting for the game 7 against Boston.
Yeah, I'm gonna advocate for Boston just because you both picked the Red Army.
No, I get it, and again, and that's not a wrong answer.
And I am fully acknowledging that I am devil's advocating this. I am picking this solely because you guys picked the Red Army game.
And I apologize for pooping on your.
You're gonna pick the other game and then still steal my thunder, huh?
The symmetry argument of
pick the other game and still jerk my point out from underneath me.
I'm sorry.
The fact that the Flyers are down 3-0 in that game, Jack Edwards is apoplectic in the booth, talking about Phillies on the run. Jack, relax. It's the first period. Peter Laviolette's calling a timeout. James Van Riemsdyk is scoring an absolute squeaker before the end of the first period. The Flyers are coming back in this game.
The greatest Flyers timeout in history.
Well, I was going to say, if there's ever been a timeout, maybe, and maybe partially the history of the league that has turned the game around.
Correct.
I say this with my tongue firmly planted in my cheek. Point to one good timeout Fred Shero ever took. I dare you.
They didn't have them.
Tongue firmly in cheek.
It does make you wonder though why he didn't do it at 2-0. But that's a whole. Forget it. Don't worry about that. Go ahead, Kyle.
Either way,
it just helped the moment even more.
Listen, the series wasn't 2-0. They didn't come back from 2-0.
I know.
I guess technically they did.
But you know what I mean.
They did, but yeah.
The symmetry of 3-0, 3-0. I get it.
You come down 3-0 and in Boston. That's the thing. That game wasn't in Philly. That game wasn't with the Spectrum crowd going bananas and intimidating the Red Army game. Because don't get it twisted. The Broad Street Bullies was mostly about the on-ice product. The fans mattered too.
Yeah.
That 2010 game, that happened in Boston. You're in TD Garden with
A
Pete
very
Zdeno
good
Chara,
Boston team.
Brad Marchand. I
mean, that team won the cup the next year.
Right.
Right. That team added Tyler Seguin and won the cup, which is ridiculous. But that team was primed. That's the same team that won the cup.
Well,
exactly.
I was back. I mean, I was back when Lucic was in his prime.
Lucic
they actually
2 of those 3 goals,
and they had two really good goaltenders because Rask was just starting his career,
and Tim
Thomas came back the following year and was outstanding.
Yep.
Right.
Tim Thomas played
very underrated goalie. Very underrated goalie.
So yeah, I'm advocating for the one game. By the way, the one game in the Final Four that took place after 1976.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Yeah.
And it's not gonna go anywhere.
Well, there's no accident that 3 of the 4 games were 1976 or prior because that was the greatest team in Flyers history.
Sure, that's the only team that put the hardware on the shelf.
Right. I mean, and that's also why I said you could make the argument for a couple others. I mean, the one in the middle of the 2000s. I mean, if there's different ways we could have structured it. That's the thing. It was based on the structure of the bracket. These to me were the Final Four. Easy. Yeah. It was easy to get there. But based on if it was separated differently, maybe by an era or something like that, now you're doing, okay, you have to pick one game out of the Broad Street Bully era and one out of the 80s and one out of the 2000s, good luck with that. But then the 2000 game 4 or 5 overtimes holds a lot more significance in a spot like that, where it's pick one from 1995 to 2008 or something like that. Then I think that's far and away the winner of that portion of the bracket. If you had to pick one game from the 80s, I think you're picking J.J. Daniel,
absolutely.
To separate them into that thing. When you put these games against each other, though, I think the Cup clinchers hold a higher place and the Red Army game holds a higher place than a lot of these games. And I think the significance of that 2010 comeback does hold a really special place in franchise history.
It does, yep.
It just does.
And
so it's why we're talking about it.
Exactly. No, are we trying to revert back to where we came from?
So would either of you gentlemen, we have 2 semifinal matchups here to talk about. Would both of you gentlemen pick Game 10 against Boston over the second cup?
Yeah, I would.
It seems like you've kind of set that up. Senior, would you do that?
It's the 75 cup clincher is the only game that I could say, again, just from a memorable, and I'm not saying it isn't significant, but I think it was a foregone conclusion.
Say it's the weakest of the 4. Go ahead.
It is. If you're going to put one of the other games in the Final Four, the only one you can take out is the 74 cup clincher. And the 75 cup clincher. Mm-hmm. And I know it's a cup clincher, but again, I think it was a foregone conclusion going into that series that we were going to win that cup. We would have been seriously disappointed if they didn't win that cup. We were significantly better than Buffalo. Buffalo was good, but we were significantly better.
And I look at that round at round 3 collectively, and I mean the 74 cup clincher went against the 2004 brawl game against Ottawa and should have never been as close as it was.
That's one of my biggest disagreements with the poll. How does that game go 56-44?
Now there's 2 matchups in round 3 though, and I said I had comments on all 4 of them. The Red Army game went against 5 overtimes, which would have been a great Final Four matchup in its own right if it came down to it.
Game.
And that played out exactly that's the way you won a matchup.
Correct.
Like that.
Correct.
You really had to think hard about it. Both are extremely memorable from hockey standpoints. I mean, that 5 overtime game is still the longest one beyond the 1940s in hockey history. That's exactly what I hoped it would be. And then when 2010 Game 7 goes against J.J. Daniel in that same thing, I was disappointed that wasn't closer. That needs to be a 80-20 is too far. And again, I voted for it. Like my vote is for 2010 in that spot. But I want it to be close. I think that 87 series is outstanding when you go back and watch everything. And my argument, by the way, the thing that I hinted to earlier is that during the entire 87 Stanley Cup final, the Flyers played the whole series, half the playoffs, without Tim Kerr. And if they have Tim Kerr, do you think that they can make up the 5-goal differential for the rest of the series? I think they can, especially with the way Hextall was playing.
I think they can. I don't necessarily say it's a
I mean, I'm not trying to say that you can get 5 more by Grant Fuhrer, all-world Hall of Famer.
No, I also get some defensive help there.
But people do forget that Kerr didn't play that series. People completely forget it. And we're not talking about, Murray Craven. I mean, who obviously had a big goal, but we're talking about a 50-plus goal scorer that they lost. Take Yari Curry off that team and see what happened, and put Kerr back on the Flyers.
I mean, and looking back, I just did that series last week, or I think Thursday was when I published that one. I mean, Curry was. I mean, I'm trying to go back through because I believe who won the Conn Smythe that year. I think Messier did, maybe.
I know of the Conn Smythe. That's playoff MVP, right?
Yeah.
No, Hextall.
Oh, Hextall won it in this. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
that's okay.
Oh, but like as I'm looking, I'm going, who would you have picked if you were picking an Edmonton player? Because Curry was probably the better, like the more productive player in the series. He was more productive, way more productive than Gretzky was.
Imagine the most valuable player on that team.
No, but Gretzky only had 2 goals in the series, I think.
Yep.
Or something like that, 2 or 3, and it was and Curry had I think 8 in that series.
When I say Markel's probably the most underrated Flyer of all time, that's one of the reasons why. How do you hold Gretzky down that long, that over seven games?
I'm sorry, I don't know who you're talking about. He didn't even make the final 4 of our poll.
Who are you
talking about?
The most underrated Flyer of all time.
I've never heard of him.
Two consecutive seasons of plus 80 or better.
I don't understand.
Plus 80, not 40.
I don't understand.
80.
Well, the balance that they had up front too in that series. When you look at the different players who scored through, I mean, Tocchet was really good in that series, and Prop was good in that series, obviously. But then beyond that, the number of different guys who scored. I mean, Zezel was one of their top scorers in the regular season, and I don't think factored into more than maybe 2 or 3 goals in the series. And that shows Edmonton was as a winning team that had so much offensive firepower, was also an underrated defensive team beyond Grant Fuhrer.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, they had so many. I mean, Kevin Lowe is a good play. I mean, aside from Paul Coffey, obviously, but Lowe and Huddy and Randy Gregg, they're all part of it, and they all factor in. And you need all of them.
They don't win their 4 or 5 cups until they learned how to play defense.
Sure, exactly.
The Islanders, their 4th cup, smoked them in 4 straight because they beat them 2-1, 3-1 every game. They couldn't outscore the Islanders, and they said, wow, we can't win the cup until we learn how to do that. And the next year, they did it to the Islanders, and then they went on their run.
Yeah, and I mean, there was, I believe it might have been game 5 of the series. The Flyers come back in that game, too. And that's not even one on the list, but they were down in that one.
I think that was game 3. Yeah, they were down 3-0.
Well, they were down in a lot of them. I mean, game 3, they were down 3-0. Game 5, I think they were down 2-0.
Yeah, the series was basically over.
Down 2-0, I think, in game 5 on the road, and they come back in that one because Tocchet scores twice in that one. But 2 of the 3 goals for Edmonton, eventually they're up 3-1 in that game.
Right.
From Marty McSorley.
Right.
Who you wouldn't even think, their depth across the board was outstanding.
Arguably the greatest team ever, the 87 Oilers. And if not for that team,
I don't know about arguably. I think it just is.
Yeah, I mean,
it's hard to argue with six Hall of Famers, and then you talk after the 6 Hall of Famers. Oh, and by the way, something I forgot to mention when I mentioned the 6 Hall of Famers before is just a Hall of Fame head coach behind the bench too.
Yep.
In the expansion era, I think the 87 Oilers are at. If you want to talk about the Montreal Canadiens from,
I mean, it's one of the things that has to be considered too. And again, I've done a lot of looking back in these times and done these series and things like. I did the 80 series against the Islanders too. That was loaded too. That team was loaded with a lot of talent as well, and had a Hall of Fame head coach and GM doing everything. I mean, those are the names that hang in the rafters for the Islanders. Most of them. I mean, it goes far beyond just Nystrom and Trottier and Bossy. It's everybody. There's a lot of guys they had. I mean, Denny Potvin was outstanding in that series.
Correct.
As much as I hate going back on fond memories in French history, it's not like they played slouches when they've lost either. You know
Correct.
what I mean? Like that's the thing. They've played some really historically great teams.
Correct. The Mike Keenan Flyers, those mid-'80s teams, if they're by far in Philadelphia sports history, the greatest team never to win a championship, without a doubt.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So good. It's a shame.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess to put a cap on this little portion of everything and just finish off the round 3 portion. All right, first of all, the one disagreement I had in round 3 was I thought that the 0-4 Game 6 against Tampa needed to move on instead of the 2012 Game 3 against Pittsburgh.
100%.
And even if that was the game that moved on, I don't know that I would have had it as close as that matchup was.
Right.
No matter what. But it definitely should not have been that close between a 75 cup clincher and a 2012 game in the first round that didn't hold any real significance to the rest of the playoff.
Listen, that game was great. What are you talking about?
Oh, I'm not saying it wasn't a great game, but at the same time, like, I don't know. Do I find it more memorable? Like, I think that compared Give me 06 Game 4 against Tampa and 12 Game 3 against Pittsburgh.
And I think
and I will take the game. And I will take the
memorable.
game where the captain scores a goal with 2 minutes left to prolong the game, backs against the wall to try to have your shot at going for the Cup final. You know, captain scores a goal and then helps to set up another one for Simone Gagne that gets you to a Game 7 over a Game 3 in the first round where they didn't advance past the second.
I think there's an era of Flyers history that is criminally underlooked at this point. And I think it's that age gap that we've kind of all talked about. And it almost feels on Twitter like 1985 through 2010, or I'm sorry, through about 2008 is pretty ignored. And then people know their history. People know their 70s. People know their Broad Street Bullies. People know some of the history. And then people know the modern era, the Claude Giroux era, shall we say. But it feels like there's kind of a gap for about 25 years before that. Does that make sense?
I don't completely disagree.
Okay.
I think the 80s, the Keenan time.
And I'm firmly talking about representation on Twitter and conversation.
I think that era is more forgotten than the Lindros era. I think the Lindros era is fairly well remembered, and the reason it's not talked about.
The Lindros era is more well remembered for the antics and the overall rather than specific.
I think it's remembered
events.
Very well. I think the reason why it's not talked about a lot is because there's an overriding feeling of failure.
Okay,
that's fair
for the era. That it should have been much greater than as good as it was. It should have been greater, and that's 100% true.
I agree. As we all know my thoughts on Eric Lindros.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's another the thing that I liked most about getting to where we got to with the Final Four was whenever there would be a matchup, and I think a good one in the second round is Game 7, the comeback against Boston, going against the one that gets them into the Cup final, where you put two games in the similar era together and tell people make a choice. And it's better when it can be something that's when it's something that can be very similar in terms of not putting it so recently. Like, here's two games from the 80s or here's two games from the 70s. Pick one. And now you either have no choice but to learn about those moments and figure out which one really is the best in your opinion,
right,
or you remember living through them and you have a choice based on how fondly you remember one or the other. But I liked when similar eras went against each other. And I mean, I noticed that with a couple of the first round games that I disagreed with to an extent. I mean, you're talking about some of those forgotten things, and I go through the rest of the first round to an extent, and okay, we got through the first couple. The Cup game should have easily won, no question about it. The Rona game would have won otherwise. I picked the Stadium Series, blah, blah, blah. We've already been there, done that. I thought that the Brawl game against Ottawa, beating Hextall's first goal, was fair, and I didn't think it was too bad of a percentage. I thought that Brawl was probably the last of its kind in the league to this point.
And that's evidenced by it making it as far as it did.
Sure. I thought the Laviolette Bilesma, that image beating the 2012 Winter Classic, as much as the 2012 Winter Classic provided a great atmosphere and was the first of its kind in Philadelphia.
April 1st, 2012 was special.
Well,
yeah.
But here's the thing. I think that is a closer matchup if you say you're talking about the whole weekend of the Winter Classic with the alumni game thrown in,
okay,
as opposed to just the game itself. The Winter Classic game itself, because it didn't, it ended poorly. They didn't win the game. I think that takes some of the gravitas off of that, and it puts it back onto a game against Pittsburgh in the middle of a playoff race, as opposed to the collective nature of the weekend where here's all of these Flyer legends coming back, playing on the same ice. Bernie gets on the ice for the last time, and it was the only times he ever participated in an alumni game, and he actually goes in and faces a few shots. And it's the reunion with Lindros and kind of the picking up the pieces of that moment that have created so much. A little piece of news we've had in the last 2 weeks is he's an official team ambassador now. Was that even imagined 10 years ago?
Right.
It wasn't.
Definitely. No, it wasn't. Definitely not.
They have picked up the pieces to the point where now he is a Flyer Hall of Famer. His number is retired. All of that. And a lot of it, so justly earned because he has a great place in the franchise's history. But the way it ended made you think it was never going to be possible. And they've managed to patch all of that up.
Right.
So
And Lindros deserves some credit for that.
Yeah, he does.
For sure.
I think he's really put a lot behind him. He's taken the high road on a lot, and it's
a lot.
It's great. And it's really cool to see him tweet out after that news comes out over the weekend, "I'm coming home." Like,
right.
It's great to see that.
If he had been the post-retirement, last 5 years pro Philadelphia Lindros, if he had been that Lindros during his playing time, he would be loved, and he probably would have accomplished a lot more as a Flyer.
You can say the same thing about Donovan McNabb too. It's hindsight is 2020.
I never got the impression that McNabb's on field had anything to do with the things that happened off the field. He's a gigantic baby. Never got over the fact that we booed that we didn't take Ricky Williams, and he never could understand we didn't boo Donovan McNabb. We booed not Ricky Williams. He never got over that, and he's a gigantic baby. But his performance on the field was always what it was. I don't think that impacted his ability on the field. But this is the Flyers podcast.
No, exactly. Well, I think to Mike Senior's point, Lindros always got the fan base.
Right.
I don't think there was ever a point where he didn't get the fans in any way, and he's always been complimentary of them in any return. From the ovation he gets at that Winter Classic alumni game when he comes back to all of the ceremonies and everything like that. He's always been complimentary of the fan base and the memories of it. And I mean, honestly, I'd love to. One of the things I would love to be able to talk to him about personally is the way he talks about certain teammates, the way he talks about John LeClair, the way he talks about Rod Brindamore, the way he talks about Eric Desjardins. He has a lot of high regard for the teammates he played with during that time, and in all of the feuding with Bobby Clark, the GM at that time, and all that type of stuff. And the way that ended. Compliments him to no end for making that trade to get LeClair and Desjardins, because he said that was what changed everything.
Right.
And I think Eric Lindros has kind of gone down in history as the best example of why you don't necessarily tell a kid he's the next Wayne Gretzky at 15 in a lot of ways.
I mean, there were people who also said that about Ovechkin and Crosby, and they're not necessarily wrong.
And I didn't say no. I didn't say
there's no other Gretzky,
Mario,
but
I didn't say
Mario
that,
heard it too.
No, I didn't say you should never tell these kids. I'm saying he's the best example of the anti argument, right? He's the one that didn't make it. He was the big touted one who never won the cup, who never, whatever you want to say about him.
His mom and dad.
We don't have to get into Eric Lindros here. We've done it enough.
His mom and dad relationship was always going to be an issue, regardless of whether we ever heard the name Wayne Gretzky in the next one or any of that stuff. That relationship
gets a little bit less legs when you're told from age 12. Like that.
No, what I'm saying is, regardless of what he
heard,
told
at age 12,
regardless of what he heard from other people, that relationship being what it was always going to be a problem.
Okay.
Depending on how upon the GM handled it, and Clark handled it poorly.
And
he deserves as much. Yeah, I hear you. But I don't want Lindros to be solely bashed. Clark.
Oh no, I'm okay with him being solely bashed. That's fine.
No, Clark deserves to be bashed for that time period not being as successful as it should have been too. It's equally Bobby Clark's fault as it was Eric Lindros.
Absolutely, and that's fair.
Well, then speaking of Lindros, I'll move on in round one because this was one of my tough ones. The 97 Game 4 against the Rangers going against 2012 Game 1 against Pittsburgh. 2012 1, I picked 97.
Okay.
And the
97 was the Ranger game?
Yeah, it was Game 4 too. Okay. So that was the one that he scores with 7 seconds left.
Right.
And I don't know. Ever going back, and I know we have talked about this before, but I'm pitching this to our listeners and viewers here. Ever gone back and watched clips of that series on YouTube, that 97 Eastern Conference Final from the hat trick that Lindros had in Game 3, and that Game 4 where he scores late to win the game? It's a 1-1 game with about 3 minutes left, and John Drews scores a shorthanded goal to give them the lead. Then you come back the other way, and I think it was Brian Leach who scored to tie it in the closing moments too. So there were 3 goals scored in the final 3 minutes of the game between the two sides.
I don't fully remember that. That's interesting.
And well, again, it was for me, it was another series that I profiled, so that's why I have a little bit more.
Right. Just in my mind, I didn't vote for that game because in my mind, even though it was kind of a passing of the torch from Messier to Lindros, I just thought the Flyers were so much better than the Rangers, especially in hindsight as the series played out. They were so much better that, again, it's sort of like that 74 Buffalo team. The Flyers were so much better. It's a little bit less memorable to me.
I also called that 97 Ranger team. I said that was a team that was trying to squeeze the last drops out of the
exactly.
team.
Exactly.
And that's what between Gretzky was 36, Messier was 35, I think, by that point. And then a lot of the other guys on that team there were a few in their
On the way down.
But Leach was in his prime still, and Richter was
absolutely.
30 at that time.
They weren't terrible.
So
they weren't terrible. But the Flyers were clearly the young, up-and-coming team. And again, the very end of that series, within the last 30 seconds to a minute, the empty net, the Rangers are trying to tie the game, and Lindros and Messier have a center ice race for the puck. And Lindros just clearly out-skates him, out-maneuvers him, out-muscles him for the puck, and gets the goal.
Man, and he out-skated a geriatric. Good for him.
That's the lasting memory of me in that series, was how we're just bigger, better, and faster.
Eric Lindros ended a playoff series on his feet. Good for him.
Oh my goodness. Well, and in fairness, again, I think the result was not as close as I would have hoped it was, and I could have gone either way. I mean, that game one of that 2012 series was also a 3-0 comeback as well. So that's
all right. Let's just get into it.
Speaking of games that were just way too close. We've talked about the 75 cup clincher not being if any team was going to not get to the Final Four, that would be the one. All that being said, it was still a hugely memorable, important game in the franchise. Mm-hmm. For it to win 52-48 against the 2010 regular season game, and I know it put them in the playoffs, but to go 52-48 to a regular season game is a complete and utter disgrace.
I was going to ask about cutting to it. And what matchup frustrated you or got you the most angry and the most riled up? And it turns out you were already going to talk about it. So let's just make the transition.
Yeah, well, because
52-48, what's the problem?
Because that team gets so much lack of love. The very next round, it goes 52-48 to the 2012 Game 3 against Pittsburgh. This game is a cup clinching win game. It squeaks out 2 back-to-back wins at 52-48. Fan base, you got the Final Four right. I'll give you that. By the end of the week, I was a lot less mad than I was, but I'm still furious. Those two results, along with the 74 championship game going 56-44 to the 2004 Ottawa brawl game, those three were a complete and utter disgrace to this fan base. We're better than that.
Kevin?
Well, I mean, next to that one in my notes, the first one anyway, the 75 cup clincher against the shootout against the Rangers, I just have 3 words: way too close, written in all caps.
Yeah, that was way too close. You're right. The Flyers should have won that game in regulation. It shouldn't even gone to a shootout. That was way too close.
That's not what I'm talking about. That matchup is way too close. I get the fondness over a lot of things in the 2010 season. And again, I think that there's more merit for this to be a closer matchup, not this close, but a closer matchup. If that's the first step, they get in on the last day in a shootout where they're not good at all and go on to win the Stanley Cup. Then it has a lot more merit to it, the same way that I think that the comeback does against Boston. If you win the whole thing, and that was one of the major turning points, and I think both could be considered turning points if they would have won the Cup, then yes, I think that it should be closer. I don't think that a non-playoff game should beat a cup clincher, though. And then at that point in time, I would love to see where – because let's put it this way. If they win the Cup in 2010 and beat Chicago in that series, and those games hold so much more meaning, then the 2010 clincher is on our list somewhere too.
Of course,
and
right.
Of course, it's not in this case. And
with probably at least one more game in the final.
Well, exactly. That's my point. I mean, but there's no way, shape, or form does a game that just got you into the tournament come – anywhere close to a game where you get handed the trophy.
Right.
Okay. Now, what about the arguments about it against 2012 Game 3 against Pittsburgh?
When it happened there? All right. I said this about –
what did you think about that matchup?
Well, I already didn't like it because of the fact that I thought it shouldn't have even been the 2012 game. I thought it should have been the 04 Game 6 because to me – I
had a problem with that whole region of the bracket, basically.
Well, it's not I have a whole problem with the region. I have a lot of problems with the love for that series overall. That's not a great – I mean, is it memorable to an extent?
It's a fun series.
It's memorable because it was fun because –
It's also the last playoff series
because you got Crosby off his rocker in that series, and he didn't know – he was going after people by the end.
And that's when we truly saw unglued Gino for the first time.
Right. I get why that's memorable to some extent. But I think it's also an overrated series because it's remembered more for Crosby being the way he was and for
It's
the
about the glove flick,
physicality
and
the
I don't like
brawls
them.
that happened than it was about the actual games itself, I think.
There was no goaltending.
Exactly. It's a horrible series.
Every game was 8-6.
It is historically bad goaltending in that series from both sides. Brizgalov was horrible, and Fleury was somehow worse than Brizgalov was.
But you know what?
Collectively, it's a horrible series, and I don't think
it's fun.
It's fun, but I think it in no way, shape, or form compares to a game 6 of an Eastern Conference final. Your back is against the wall. It's a team that, and I think that there are times where you're going to play in series in the playoffs where the conference final may be the better matchup than the cup final would have been.
No, you can't use that. No.
Oh,
you can't use that if it
that.
leads to the cup. As an argument for the 2010 games, and then, in 2004, the Eastern Conference Finals was, just as big.
No,
as
I'm saying
cup.
that was the two better teams. I'm saying that's what I'm trying to say. The
whoever won that series was probably going to win the cup.
So your dogfight was the conference final, not the cup final per se, or maybe it would have been, but there's no way to know that. It took 7 games for Tampa to beat Calgary anyway, and maybe maybe there's a correlation between. It takes everything you've got in the cup final because it took everything you've got in the conference final. It went the distance there too. There's a difference between, you barely played anything to get to that point in the playoffs, so you're fresher, you're ready to go, and you find a way to pull out that series as opposed to you're grinding the whole way through. And that, to me, that Tampa team's really good. The Tampa team's got a lot of good players on it when in hindsight. That's why I said I don't think that a lot of times when you've looked at this team in the cup final or in some conference finals and say they didn't lose 7-game series to teams that were slouches. No. They lost to significantly good teams that deserve to go the distance and win the cup usually that year.
And even talking about that 2010, going back to that 2010 Chicago team, that team that they ended up losing to, none of those games made deep runs here. We did have 2010 game 3 win their first round.
Right.
But they did lose to a very good Chicago team. That team, they might not be on the same. Are they on the same level as the 04 Lightning? I'm not going to put them with the 87 Oilers. That's ridiculous. But are they with the 04 Lightning?
No, they're probably better.
They're better.
They're better than that team.
That was the start of realistically the only modern day dynasty we've seen.
Okay, so is that team
for sure?
I can't use dynasty because they never went back to back, but they did win 3 and 6.
They won 3 of 6, and it was the closest.
They were terrific.
I think it's the closest.
Better. Better than Tampa.
It's the closest thing to a post-lockout dynasty we've seen.
So I agree. I
Absolutely.
think you guys are doing that 2010 team a little bit of a disservice. Yes, they didn't win the cup. But just because we don't see any of these Chicago games in this conversation doesn't mean we can't talk about the fact that run ended because of a very good Chicago team.
Oh, no,
they didn't win the cup in 2010 because they lost to a very good Chicago team.
But Kevin's talking more about the
Boston. And lost to a very good Chicago team.
Yeah, but this is in relation to now we're on 04 against 12. And what I'm trying to say is that game 6 of a conference final against 2 teams that probably were battling it out to see which one was going to go and probably go on to win the cup that year.
For sure.
Over the course of going against
a game 3 in the first round.
A game 3 in a first round where neither team was good enough to get past the second round anyway.
I think that is fair.
Based on the way their goaltending was.
Right. 100% the game 3 Pittsburgh 2012 got the most love that it shouldn't have gotten in this entire bracket thing that we did here, because again, it beat the Tampa Bay final, which it shouldn't have beaten it, and then it almost took out the 75 Cup team 52-48. You're talking like 4 votes. And the 2012 game beats the 75 Cup clincher. And that's
right.
Sorry, fan base. That's just flat out wrong. Love the fan base, but it's flat out wrong.
Yeah, let's put it this way. I'm trying not to bounce too far between first round, second round, but we're on second round at the moment. And again, we 74 Cup clincher going against Stadium Series. 62-38 is too close in my mind. It shouldn't be that way. The 2 brawls going against each other at 59-41. Hey, we got the 04 brawl against Laviolette Bilesma.
Yeah,
okay, great. That's a pretty even one. I like that. I come back to that 2012 series when it's 5 overtimes going against game 1 of that series, and it's a 54-46. That's not even close.
Right.
And I'm telling you guys, I understand where you guys are coming from, but it comes down to the demographics here. And I'm telling you guys, that 04 team, right, wrong, or indifferent, people don't remember that team quite as much as they remember more modern teams. Whether they should or shouldn't,
that's accurate.
Maybe the fan base needs to go do some homework and rewatch that 04 run, because we've seen from you two in this podcast, it seems like a lot of your frustration is coming from that 04 run getting a little underrated, shall we say. You know, we talk about that game 6 against Toronto, against losing to the Stadium Series. Talk about the Tampa team losing to that Boston game. Maybe this fan base needs to do some homework.
No, yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Here's where part of the frustration comes in, though, that you're talking about how much love Danny Briere got in the prior poll. Well, where's that love for that team here?
To some extent, yes. I mean,
you know, they're not congruous. They don't fuse together very well. So the fan base has to take some responsibility for that. That's all I'm saying.
Maybe they do.
I mean, there's certain ones too where, like, I'm trying to see where else there was another example of it, but there was, you know, like, I'm pleasantly surprised that it was so one-sided on that Game 7 comeback when you put a January 2015 regular season game in there. I mean, it seems like sometimes the votes favor, here's just the most recent thing, and I remember watching it, and that's it. And granted, that's a 2010 against a 15, but it doesn't explain there's certain aspects of it where it's just a ridiculously recent game. That 2012 series just gets so much love in this when it's nowhere close to the most memorable series.
It's the most recent win.
And I know it's the most recent win, but to me,
and again, not saying it's right, not saying it's, you know, but just factually speaking, it's your most recent playoff win, and your fan base is gonna glom on.
Well, see, then that being said, that's why I'm saying 2010 Game 7, the comeback against Boston goes against the clincher against Montreal that puts them into the Cup final, and it's a 95-5 lopsided decision that I was surprised wasn't a little closer in that sense. Then
because I think the history makes making it, like, the Flyers have made the Cup a bunch of times. Flyers have never come back from 3-0 before.
Yeah, but there's a lot of
memorable.
There's a lot of people that love that Mike Richards shift, though.
A lot of people do, but it doesn't compare to the timeout and the JVR. Like, it just doesn't.
And I'm not saying that that's wrong. I agree, It doesn't compare. What I'm saying, you know, is
95-5, right?
It's a 95-5, and I thought it would be closer, given the fact that, again, you're telling people here. And Game 7 in Boston wasn't a home game. Game 5 was. How many people were at that game, watched that Mike Richards shift, and said, "That's it. That's the most memorable moment I've seen live in my lifetime."
That would be me.
But that's why it surprises me that it was such a different result.
Such a big gap. Yeah.
There's a lot of people who probably look at that 2012 series and go, "I would." And again, like, I was surprised. Like, there's where Game 1 came into that series against 5 overtimes. I don't even think Game 1 was close to the most memorable game of that series. I think Game 3 was better for the physicality, for Crosby losing his mind.
Game 6 has the shift.
And Game 6 has the Giroux shift. I think that was more memorable than this Game 1 that was in Pittsburgh, because there was a lot of people who, when the series even got to a Game 6, ran down, got tickets for it, or tried to get tickets for it. And when I'm going to this thing, and then 30 seconds into the game, Giroux has put Crosby on his rear end and scored the first goal of the game.
The most electric 30 seconds.
And rock that building the way playoff hockey deserves. That's how it works. And I think that was more memorable than a Game 1 on the road, even though they came back in that game.
I would have to agree.
I get what you're saying. See, the funny thing is we're doing this poll and we're having all these conversations. At the end of the day, it really is down to the will of the people. And I'm going to mention again that we're running these polls over on Twitter at YWT Podcast. It comes down to the will of the people. And, you know, like I said, the Final Four, the will of the people has gotten us down to the Final Four. And I don't know
for the most part, again, I think there could have been one subtle change, but I think for the most part, they got it right. That's why I'm calling out the fan base to a certain extent, but I'm not losing my my crap over it.
Right. So setting up the Final Four, because I do want to talk about it a little bit. I know we've talked about not leaning on the scale too heavy, but we would be doing a disservice not to talk about it at all.
Right. Yeah. We can make our predictions.
So the first matchup, I'm looking at the left side of the bracket on Twitter. The 1974 Stanley Cup Final, Game 6 against the Boston Bruins. Flyers winning their first Stanley Cup. You know, the Flyers win the Stanley Cup. Everyone knows the call. facing them is the Red Army game.
This is the Flyers versus Tampa Bay in 2004. Whoever wins this one's going to win it.
I think you have it. I think you have a solid case to say that.
Mhm.
It's going to be. It's hard because you're talking about Flyers history versus NHL history.
Right. I mean,
And
here's what I will say about this particular matchup.
Yeah, please.
I looked at from the previous round, from the last round we've already run and gotten to this point. Red Army game played 5 overtime. In 2010, Game 7 played J.J. Daniel.
Right.
And I literally in my head wanted both of them to be even 50-50 and let my vote be the deciding one. So like, please let one vote be the deciding factor. Like, I hope it comes that close. I really hope that this one is like that this Red Army game against the Cup clincher is very close and comes down to, because I think both deserve it. I want that to be a dogfight. I want that to be so close, because I think that Red Army game holds such significance in the franchise's history, but obviously you never forget your first Cup win. And I think that team is still so loved, and it needs to get its due, and I wouldn't be shocked if that's the winner either. I like we said earlier, I picked Red Army game in this one, but I would love to see it come down right down to the wire like some of these other ones have.
I think, and it comes down to this. You have 1974 Game 6 versus Boston. In my opinion, the most important game in Flyers history. And then the Red Army game is the most important Flyers game in history, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I hear
the
what you're
Stanley Cup
saying.
game is the most important for the Philadelphia Flyers history. The Red Army game is the most culturally significant game the Flyers have ever been a part of. This is the matchup for me. I agree. Like, the other side is fine. I think we're looking at our top 2 seeds over here. And
I agree.
To pull back the curtain a little bit, we talked before this bracket started about splitting the cup clinchers so they didn't meet before the finals. Do either of you think that that's a mistake now?
In hindsight, I would say definitely a mistake.
Okay. Kevin, do you wish the Stanley Cup final games could be meeting now so that 74 could meet Red Army in the finals? Because I believe that was the original.
Here's the reason why. And I don't mean to jump on Kevin's answer, but here's the reason why. The 75 Cup clincher has 0, and I mean 0 chance to beat the 74 Cup clincher.
Correct.
0.
I agree with that.
Okay.
So, therefore, the only game that has any chance, the 2010, I don't think it has a chance, but you can make it has a better chance than the 75 Cup clincher, that's for sure, of beating 74. But the really game that really only has the only chance to beat the 74 Cup clincher is the Red Army game. So I'd like to see them on separate sides.
And I mean,
and I'll give 2010 Game 7 a better chance than the 75 Cup clincher to beat 74. I agree with that. So
right. See, because I'm trying to answer the question the way Kyle asked it. Because if I could put these 2 in the final and find a way to make that happen, my fear of doing that is based on how everything else has gone to this point. Like, I still see that 2010 game finds its way there one way or the other.
Right.
Now you're talking that it beat something before it probably should have been there, per se. Like, the 2010 game beating 75 makes a lot of sense to me.
I can see that happening.
Sense. Like, I can see that happening, and I would agree with it. Like, I'd be fine with it.
And if
then I go to the next ones, and like I can't bring myself to pick either game, the Cup clincher or the Red Army game, over 2010, even though it's the only one that's left that I actually live to see.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's my thing. Like, I can't bring myself to see the 10 comeback winning it all. I have this weird feeling that is what could happen, because I just think that that's the way that the results are going to go. I wouldn't do it that way. I'm not going to sit there and say that.
Oh, we're not leaning on the scale, though, huh?
No, but I'm not. Like, what I'm saying, like,
I wouldn't do it that way.
Well, no, because I already gave my answer. I already said that I think that if I had to weigh it, I would pick the Red Army game. And again, I remember a lot of details about that game, that 2010 game. And here's the thing that I remember the most about it. I didn't watch it in the way that I've watched just about every other game in my lifetime. And I'm not talking about before I was going.
All right, who was getting married? Where were you stuck going that you had to watch while you were there?
All right,
you were definitely at a wedding or something.
Nope.
Something was going on.
I'll break the whole thing down for you.
Let's go. Let's tell the story.
My senior year of high school, I was in band in high school, so we were on a trip that involved a competition. I was in the middle of a competition, And the game started while we were at the competition. I remember getting back on the bus. We were going back to the hotel. We were in Hershey, I think.
Okay.
We were going back to the hotel, and I checked, and I remembered I actually don't even remember in the moment that it was 3-0. I think I found that out in hindsight because it was already 3-1. It was end of the first period, and I checked then. All I could do was check a score. I couldn't watch. It was too early for that. We didn't have the workarounds we do. And I remember getting back to the hotel, finding a way to stream the game, and by the time I was even able to check an update, it was 3-3 already.
Wow.
So I didn't see JVR's goal. I didn't see Hartnell's goal. I didn't see Briere's goal in the moment. And I watched on a very god-awful stream that didn't have any quality whatsoever. So I couldn't even see where the puck was going. I had to rely on – and it wasn't the local. It was the Versus broadcast. So I didn't even have –
we're talking more than a couple of years ago, so it wasn't as easy to Google a stream and find one in 30 seconds.
Correct. Sure. It took me a while. I finally found one and watched
watched legally while paying for NHL TV, of course, is what I meant. Yeah.
Exactly. But – and watched it that way because even the damn hotel we were in didn't have Versus that I could put in.
Oh no, it was on Versus.
Well, no. I didn't have any way of accessing the local, and at the very least, since the local was probably far enough out of market, I could have gotten it on Versus. I would think in the middle of Hershey. So I would think. Yeah. So it should have been like, and even then. Didn't even have it on that TV. So I'm going, crap, now I got to pull up some stream. Computers weren't as good then, stuff like that. Streams were awful. And but I still remember the fact that my dad was with me on the trip too. So we watched it in this hotel room on the a really tiny screen and went absolutely nuts when Gagne scored and stuff like that. And secret, I don't know. I had a Flyers t-shirt that I had packed with me at that point. He had actually secretly thrown his jersey into his luggage and didn't wear it while we watched, wore it the next day. and sure enough, it worked out. But that's my detail. And so I remember every detail of it. And we go back and I still watch that one. I wished I was there physically in the then the Wachovia Center, but the Wells Fargo Center to watch with everybody else. So it's tough. We're
telling stories about being seniors in high school. Senior, where were you in 75 when they won, senior in high school? Like, where were you?
I was on my street. It was playing actually on the radio. I was 10, so we were actually we're playing.
Oh, you weren't a senior in high school? Oh, okay.
No, we were playing ball on the street, listening to the Flyers. Everybody's listening to it on their radios, on their steps. When they got closer to winning it, we all went in our houses and watched like the third period. And I was in my house on my sofa when the Flyers are going to win the Stanley Cup.
Senior's timeline lines right up with my dad's timeline because my dad was 11 when they won the cup in 70.
Right.
There you go. They are virtually the same age. There you go.
And I think he watched it and had one like they still do it to an extent. They have the scorecards that they sell at the games, and it's a player poster, it's a poster of some kind, and you can keep score in the back. I think he kept score during
the little program thing.
It has a box score filled out in some way. I think if I'm not mistaken. So I have that too.
I know you're going to go Red Army over 74. I understand that. And again, I hope it's very close because I think they are that close and it is that significant. Here's the reason why, not to put our finger on the scale, here's the reason why I go 74. If not for 74, 76 Red Army probably doesn't happen.
True. That's a good point.
So probably right. They're not the same juggernaut that they are.
Yeah. Correct. That turned them into and getting Reggie Leach the year after and winning a back-to-back cup that made them a better team and all that stuff. But again, I don't know that they have the same swagger and get the back-to-back cup wins without the 74 win in Boston Game 6.
I think that is a perfectly valid point and something that I don't think enough people talk about. And we're sitting here looking at our Final Four, and I got to tell you, I'm looking at this left side, and it really does look like the finals to me, right? Game 6 against Boston, winning the first cup versus the Red Army. Maybe 2010 pulls off an upset in the finals, but That left side of the bracket certainly looks like it's the finals. For
well, I mean, and this is what I meant when I went back. This is what I meant when I said the thing about the top 6 from the beginning. It's not necessarily to say that one of them, like, you can interchange all 6, but if anybody told you that any of those top 6 games was their most memorable, it'd be hard to argue it.
Correct. Five overtime beat Red Army.
5 overtime is the one. And look, I know somebody who had told, I didn't notice about that person until they kind of disclosed it in the kind of game setting that you do, like where you play 2 truths and a lie or something like that. Disclosed that he was at that game. And I'm like, you were like, whoa, at the 5 overtime game. How does anything ever top that you were physically there to watch? No,
nothing does. It
doesn't, awesome. And that's the thing. So it's like, if that's any of those games are your most memorable, I'm not faulting you for it at all. There's a lot of close matchups and
there's some really good options. We put them all here for a reason. So
yeah, I mean, and that being said, there were so many things that we throughout the week in our chats disagreed about, and we didn't like how the results were shaking up by the numbers, but the end results pretty much turned out the way that I think we would have had them. And that's the thing. So when we got down to the Final Four, yes, these are easily four of the top games in the franchise's history, and most memorable, no question about it.
So yeah, we we're looking on this poll and we got our Final Four, and it looks like this is going to be it, and I think it's going to be a really good couple of matchups here, and I'm excited to see what our fans think is the greatest Flyers game of all time. You can do so by following us on Twitter at YWT Podcast. The polls will be up there. Our producer, Mike, puts them up at Mike_Giletto. He puts them up on our podcast page at YWT Podcast. You can also find Mike Sr. at Mike from S Jersey and Kevin at _Durso. You can also find the show, just search You Would Think, everywhere on Facebook, Instagram, Podbean, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, sportstalkphilly.com, YouTube now, apparently. And we're going to get out of here. But before we do that, I am going to give you gentlemen one last chance to speak your piece here. Kevin, final thoughts on the bracket and anything else you have to say to our listeners before we get out of here.
Well, I mean, I've kind of given as many thoughts as I think I can on the bracket. I'm pleased with where we are at this point.
And I'm sure there will be more. I'm sure there will be more on Twitter if people would like them.
I mean, the one thing I do want to sit there and say to people who are going to vote on this, because I saw a lot of people who put in the comments at times, especially early, oh, this isn't even a thought. I'm not even entertaining that with a response. Please do vote, though, because it does matter.
What you're saying is every vote matters, Kevin.
Yes, it does. Right? Absolutely,
get out there
it does.
And vote.
Like, and in that sense, like, I don't think people realize how much it shifts from just a couple of votes,
Absolutely.
And as much as people and I think some of the ones we were talking about, the 75 cup clincher going against the 2012, going against the 2012 game, and people going, oh, come on, how is that any matchup? That's no contest. You don't know what everybody else is thinking until you push that button. And maybe you did and you think it's crazy. But it's still a hidden result. And maybe you just in your mind are going, why are you even asking such a question? That's ridiculous. Don't think it's so ridiculous. Hit the button and put your vote in because it does matter.
Right. Stop a ridiculous response from happening.
Exactly. Everybody has a say in this, and there are certainly, and believe me, I'm encouraged to see those comments because it tells me that there are people who value those moments that Mike Sr. and I went back and forth, agreed with, but went back and forth over in the group chat the whole week. As these are, like I said, I thought the second round to me, those 8 matchups, every single one of them was a no-brainer in my mind, and yet I think. I said 7 out of the 8 ended up moving on, and then there were 3 more that were really close that I couldn't believe were as close as they were. It still matters that even though you think it's a no-brainer, push the button. It matters. It definitely matters. I can't wait to see what happens. Kyle, give the people the information on when these are going to exactly happen, or how long. Because I know we've been doing 6 hours. I think they're still going to be, but
in the Final Four, they're going to be a little longer. I believe they're going to go up for a couple of days.
Yeah, Monday there should be the first matchup for a couple of days, then the second matchup for a couple of days.
Because we only have 3 matchups to get through before our next show, so they're each going to be 3, 4, 5 days, something like that. We're really going to try to get these polls out there. Really going to try to get as much response as we possibly can because we really want the best game to win. We want the most memorable Flyers game of all time to be our answer.
Yeah, for now that I remember, the player one, it went the first semifinal for like the first half of the week, the second semifinal, the second half of the week, and then the final the week after.
The whole second week.
Yeah, and
because we're going every other week. It gives us a little bit of time.
Yeah, and I think the final didn't run through the weekend per se. I think it ran through like that Friday, and we had
Friday, yeah.
And we had
probably
2 days
haven't run into Saturday, so it's right before we record.
Correct.
Right.
That would be great. And so I just want to make sure people know about that. I've been sharing those everywhere,
Definitely.
every time I can.
It's a lot of fun.
And I always debate whether or not I want to hit the button myself right away to see how the results are shaking out, or if I wait to make a decision. But because I filled out a bracket previously, I kind of knew where my thoughts were going anyway. So I kind of have hit it early, sit back and relax.
You just have to know how hard you need to campaign. That's what you're asking.
No, it's not a matter of that at all.
The longer you have to campaign for your choice.
No, but honestly, because I didn't try to go crazy in the moment of the results per se. More or less trying to just stress that every vote counts, as opposed to let's just start with the disagreement right away, because I know how Twitter works in the opposite effect. I did not want to fuel, when it was a good example of it was when I think, Mike Sr. said it for the player one, when it was Drew and Bernie and it was really close, and he go, maybe, and we were doing the show and he went, maybe I shouldn't have swayed it a little bit. Maybe I should have just let it play out. So I had even more. Like, I don't want to be that much of an influencer on the results. I more or less just want to let people know that if you have a clear cut that you think wins, and believe me, I think these 2 matchups that get us to the final are difficult enough anyway that I'm not arguing with you whether you pick one or the other. But if you think that the cup clincher is so much better than the Red Army game or vice versa, and you think for sure it's an obvious choice, hit the button.
Yeah, still hit the button.
I really kind of hope 2010 wins now, so I can just play that clip back to you when you're on the next show talking about how it's an abomination that 2010 won.
I think 2010 beats 75.
I do too.
Well, and you know what? We will see. Mike Sr., final thoughts on the bracket, and anything else you wanted to say before you get out of here?
Now, again, I think, as we had said, there were moments within the bracket that I found hugely frustrating, but by the end of it, and at the end of the day, I think the fan base got it right. The final 4, for the most part, was right. I think 2010 beats 75. I think 74 will beat the Red Army game. I do believe it will be close. And
don't worry, guys. We're not putting our thumb on the scale. It's fine.
No, I'm saying what I think will happen. I'm not saying what I think should happen. I'm saying what I think will happen and where my votes will go. But it should be fun to watch.
All right. And you know what? That's a good note to get out of here. One more time, YWT podcast. Kevin would like to say something about the current state of the coronavirus. And if you'd like to get rid of the podcast now, that's completely fine. We have not mentioned it the entire show. We're trying to be a place for you to come forget about it and just kind of have some hockey talk for a while. But at the end here, Kevin, you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, and I do want to start by saying that what we've done with the player poll first, or the player bracket first, and the games bracket now, and I'm sure that we're going to start to work up some idea down the road too, because we're probably going to need to keep doing this for a while. It's been fun. It's been great to keep going down memory lane. It's been great discussion, and it's made for, I think, several great shows. I think, Kyle, we have to mention how great last week's show was when Jason was on.
It was fantastic. He was fantastic.
Him on, and he is top notch when it comes to talking about this team in general. And I thought it was really great how it wasn't just a discussion of here's where we are in the games bracket and what do you remember about this one or that one or the other thing. There was actually some legitimate talk with him regarding the current team as well, which was good. I think it was good to just even touch back on that slightly. So I definitely want to throw that out there. I know we're all really desperate to start to see some real live sporting event of some kind. I know that I sat down over the course of the weekend and loved the fact that the NFL draft was on just because it was something happening in the moment. And I know we want to see it again really soon. Just my message to a lot of people out there is please be careful about what you're reading and the reports that may come out. There's a lot of people that are floating a lot of things. Stick to the people that you have trusted for the longest time with anything else, I would say.
Don't trust the media.
I didn't say that. I said stick to the people who you have trusted the most. If Bob McKenzie is telling you this is what we're hearing from the discussions, it's probably got some merit to it. No offense to anybody else who doesn't have that kind of track record, but it's like the end of a lockout. When the discussions that a lockout is over and we're going to start with whatever our on the horizon, you're going to trust the most trustworthy people out there who have been there, done that, and have the most inside track to the information.
Follow Bob McKenzie.
Well,
follow Elliot Friedman.
No, but a good example of it. I just saw fairly recently Pierre LeBrun put out, and he's TSN also. So it's a good – they're doing a really good job of it, that the NHL and the NHL Players Association staff are in daily contact and have been since everything with this started a month and a half ago. And currently, they are in phase 1 of their operation, and phase 1 is the way it has been from the beginning, self-isolation. Their next phase is getting players back into small groups in NHL facilities to begin working out and skating in markets that will allow it, and everything with that is to be determined. I believe every word of that tweet, because there is no determination on anything. It just means we're waiting for the next step. Yep. Don't believe everything you read. Don't believe, and especially do not believe everything that has a firm date attached to it. There is no truth to anything that said, like, there's no truth to May 15th, we're coming back, or June 1st, we're coming back. Don't buy it yet. Wait until, because for no reason other than the commissioner has not said so. Let the commissioner tell you, let the states that and this goes beyond hockey at this point, let the states and the countries that need to get everything back on track tell you it's okay to start going back on track, and then you'll have some idea that we are in a place where we can start to think about the possibility. It's still unlikely at this point, though, so just don't go crazy with these reports. You know, and don't go crazy with what other leagues are doing either. I saw what the NBA is going to try to do. I don't believe that is going to work based on everything else. That being said, that's their choice. And the one thing Gary Bettman has said from the beginning is that this is not a matter of trying to be first. It's a matter of getting it done at the right time with the hopes of playing every game that's left on these schedules. And that is the ultimate goal. And I don't know if it's a realistic goal, but buy into the fact that that's where his mindset is. We're not going to be first. We're going to be at the right time when the health is with health being the most important thing for everybody involved. And that
will come back. And they will come back the second they can. And I think that's important to mention, is because we want hockey to come back because we miss hockey and because we love watching hockey. They want hockey to come back because that's their money.
Well, and not just
they're going to come back the second they can.
Well, and not only that, but there's a lot of people that are sitting there, and I've seen comments on certain things that say, "Oh, what player is going to want to play in an empty arena? That doesn't make sense. They won't go for it."
They're all jonesing for a pair.
It's not
right
just,
now.
And it's not just that they want to get on the ice. Because I think I've always believed that how can you imagine playoff hockey without a crowd? Any fan of any team in the playoffs will watch a game on television right now if it is the first live sporting event that you have sat down to watch in 2 to 3 months. If you haven't watched anything like that, and it is your part of your lifestyle the way it is for all three of us here, then you will sit down and watch it no matter what, because you miss it that much.
100%.
So I don't want to hear that it's not going to be the same per se. It wouldn't be the same if they waited 2 weeks and now we're really taking the same precautions. It's been a month and a half. It's going to be 2 months before this is over. It's going to be closer to 3 months potentially.
Patience is key here.
And I guarantee you that with patience being a virtue, having it on television and not watching some stream of an e-game I mean, for God's sakes, I put on the one, they just had one Flyers Oilers on. And I swear to God, there was a moment where I'm like, oh my God, there was a moment of like excitement over Ivan Provorov scored in overtime. It wasn't real. And it doesn't matter. It was still something because it was just a moment. It was like something that you could still react to. Believe me, if it's real and we're watching a real game and you can react to it in real time the way we do to road games,
And and I think it's going to be weird for everybody, and empty arena is where it's going to go. And you mentioned before the call we were talking about this. The first day the NHL comes back does not mean that's when the playoffs start. We're talking about at least 2 weeks for a training camp.
Correct.
The NHL is going to do whatever they can to finish regular season games. I don't know how many they're going to get, but like you said, everybody's timeline, we're talking weeks and months, not hours and days.
Well, players are doing a great job right now of being as creative as they can to do whatever they can. I've seen a
ton of people are jumping on streams.
And granted, one of the players who I have seen do this, and he's not going to play, but it's great to see nonetheless. Anybody see Oscar Lindblom's Instagram story?
Okay, I haven't been.
Was a pair of of blades, rollerblades.
Nice.
So he's blading, which is great. And there are other, I mean, Claude Giroux is doing it, and Claude Giroux is doing it with the intention of, at least I am on some form of a skate that I can get that feel of making those motions and exercising and working out the way you need to. But that being said, you know, that's a good method to do it. They're all trying to work out the best they can in their own homes. They're doing the best they can, but they need to get on the ice. And everything I've seen from the beginning, players, Chuck Fletcher has said it. One thing I do want to pump out, it just hit me now. Chuck Fletcher was on 97.3 earlier in the week, I believe, and it was outstanding. Or maybe it was a little bit late last week, but within the last 2 weeks since our last show, he was on. And I encourage people to go listen to that. I wrote about it. It's over at Sports Talk Philly. It's over at 97.3.
Yeah.
And, you know, I encourage people to listen because I don't know that it's the same type of material you would get from a conference call setting.
Okay.
And he gave some really great answers on a few things. On the hiring process of Alain Vigneault, one of the quotes that we got that was in that interview was he said, we did one interview with him, had one other interview, and I went to Dave Scott and said, we've got to hire this guy. That's how quickly they knew Alain Vigneault was the guy. And Chuck Fletcher called him the leader of the ship, said he runs this show. It's all, you know, he's in charge of this, and you see it. Had a lot of interesting things to say about Carter Hart as well, about how from basically a great line in it was Chuck Fletcher had said, it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle once you've unveiled it. So he said we were gonna sink or swim with him no matter what. So good to know that from the beginning there was no question whose job it was. Did commend Brian Elliott for being a great part of this team to this point, and I know that down the road as they go toward next season, and I say next season not meaning a firm date on when it starts, but new contracts. They do want to explore that. I know that they would be interested in having him continue to be the mentor for the young Carter Hart moving forward. I love how I just said that in the way that says that because it's really funny to me. Kevin Weeks over at NHL Network. So some stuff on that, lots of little things like that. And there's some really good anecdotes. So to get Chuck Fletcher saying things like that, and he also, the quote that I used in the headline, by the way, he said we were tough out right now. And he actually said we are a tough out right now. He kept it in the present, and it's cool.
And he has to, for sure.
But he said it. He said it in regards to a question. It was about expectations. Where were your expectations? Were they exceeded in any way? And he even said, I don't think I thought we would be. You know, we expected the second half push. I don't know if we expected to be pushing for the division per se, but we're a tough out right now. Yeah. And he was encouraged by a lot of things, and there's some really great comments in there. I encourage people to go listen because it was. I know that I sat there listening to it all ears because I was very much interested in what he had to say, and I was very pleasantly surprised that it wasn't just kind of repetition from what we got from that conference call that he had I think a few weeks back. It was some different answers to some really good questions. So that I would throw out there as well. But and to wrap, put a bow on my whole thing originally, just be careful what you're reading because and not everything out there is true. There's a lot of rumors, and trust the people you've always trusted. They will be able to tell you when it's back.
Good content can be a little scarce at the moment. People are getting desperate and making things up, and I think you're kind of warning people away from that. But some of the places you can find good content, hopefully, are here. You can also find them in Kevin's places. There's content all over the place. So if you do want hockey content during this time, if you are bored and really looking for that hockey content during this isolation, lockdown, quarantine period, Kevin mentioned his series over on 97.3. That's been fantastic. That helps with a lot of the research that we've been doing in this for this poll.
It does, and I will add. I mean, I'm running out of them here. I'm only going to do two more, and we're done. I'm putting a bow on it with the two that probably matter the most, the 2 Cup series, and calling it there at that point. No sense in going any further back than I already was. That being said, I am also going to try to look into some of the other moments that we highlighted on the bracket as well. Things like the regular season brawl game against Ottawa, Hextall's first goal, the Red Army game that we've talked about so much. You know, you may just over the course of the week that the championship is running, find an article reviewing the Red Army game.
Okay,
in the most opportune time to put it out there, I think. But I'm just looking at stuff like that. Another interesting discussion has come up, and I think it's a good discussion, being we just did the player one before this. There's been a lot of discussion about who could be the next one to go into the Flyers Hall of Fame. I think there are several candidates that are very much deserving of it at this point. Specifically, the Flyers Hall of Fame. I had someone on Twitter confuse me with saying it as retiring a number, and I did not. No, we're not retiring it. No one's number is getting retired anytime soon, I don't think.
Right.
But Flyers Hall of Fame, I think there's a few guys. There's only 25 members of it as it is, and I think there's a few more that are being overlooked that should be in there, and we've talked about them all in several different capacities over the course of the last, oh my goodness, I don't know how many shows. 5?
Of course.
Isn't it 5 at this point, I think?
It's shows in quarantine.
We've had 5 shows since we've had to put this on pause, and we've talked about brackets, players, games.
And you know what? The best part is we'll be back in 2 weeks. And until then, I'm going to go ahead and get us out of here. One more time, Twitter at YWT Podcast. And I'm literally not saying anything else, and we are getting out of here. Goodbye. We'll see you next week.